She didn't slow her stride when she said it, didn't lower her voice. The CEO moved through the construction floor like it belonged to her breath, her heels clicking against concrete that still smelled like dust and sweat. She glanced at the worker in the hard hat, scanned him the way powerful people scan obstacles, and smirked. "You people really love blocking hallways," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Do your job and stay out of mine." The room froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. A phone tilted slightly upward, recording without permission but with instinct. Everyone waited for the reaction they expected: anger, apology, embarrassment, something loud. It never came. The man looked at her calmly. Not defiant, not afraid, just still. A black single father with tired eyes and steady hands, absorbing the insult like it was weather, unpleasant, temporary, survivable. He nodded once, stepped aside, and said nothing. That silence did something the insult couldn't. It exposed her because confidence that needs an audience always overplays its hand. And power that assumes invisibility often forgets. Who is really watching? What? She didn't realize what no one on that floor realized was that she hadn't just spoken down to a worker. She had just challenged the one man who could. Shut this project down. Asterisk. Projects like this are sold as progress. Glass towers, mixed-use promises, a ribbon cutting waiting in the future. This one cost hundreds of millions, financed by investors who never touched the ground they owned. Deadlines were brutal. Delays meant lawsuits. And pressure rolled downhill, landing hardest on the people least protected by titles. Power loves assumptions. It reads suits as intelligence, accents as authority, silence as submission. A badge on a chest or a logo on a blazer becomes proof of worth. Skin color fills in the blanks before a name is ever asked. In spaces like this, people are ranked in seconds and treated accordingly. The CEO thrived in that system. Her reputation was polished and sharp, ruthless when needed, decisive when challenged. Business magazines called her commanding. Boards praised her for cutting through noise. She believed leadership meant being seen, heard, feared just enough to keep the machine moving. The man in the hard hat was filed into a different category. Another laborer. Another body filling a shift. Quiet meant compliant. Tired meant replaceable. No one wondered where he came from or what he carried outside these walls. They saw work boots and stopped looking. This wasn't just a job site. It was a mirror of a country where labor builds empires but rarely receives credit, where immigrants and black workers are taught early that visibility invites punishment. The system rewards those who speak loudly and punishes those who endure quietly, until endurance itself becomes mistaken for weakness. And history watches every moment closely unfold, and long before that insult echoed across the floor. Both of them were already walking toward a collision neither could avoid. Asterisk, before sunrise, his day had already begun. He woke quietly so his kids could sleep, packed lunches with the precision of habit, and checked homework one last time before pulling on boots still dusted from yesterday. Responsibility didn't announce itself in his life. It showed up early and stayed late. On the job, he spoke only when necessary. Not because he lacked words, but because he had learned which ones were worth spending. His hands told the story instead. Scarred knuckles, steady grip, movements measured and exact. He built things meant to last because he knew what instability did. To children watching adults fall apart, people mistook his calm for weakness. They mistook silence for ignorance. In rooms where volume was currency, restraint looked like poverty. He let them believe it. Arguing back would have fed their assumptions. Explaining himself would have given them power he didn't owe. What they never saw was the discipline behind that stillness. The years of navigating systems that demanded proof twice over. The understanding that dignity, once surrendered, is rarely returned. He wasn't invisible by accident. He had learned when visibility protected you, and when it invited harm. So when the insult landed, he absorbed it without flinching. Not out of fear, but out of choice. He understood something she didn't. That control doesn't raise its voice. And real authority doesn't rush to be recognized. Standing there, overlooked and underestimated, he carried a truth heavier than the tools at his side. A truth earned quietly, patiently, without witnesses. His focus stayed on finishing the task, clocking out on time and getting home for dinner. Because presence mattered more than praise, and promises to children mattered more than pride. In a world that rarely rewarded patience or quiet integrity like this. What no one standing there knew was that his connection to the building ran far deeper than the steel beneath their feet. She liked to tell the story of her rise, as if it were destiny. First in, last out, sharper than the men who underestimated her, harder than the systems she learned to exploit. Authority, to her, wasn't a responsibility. It was proof. Proof she had earned the right to be obeyed. In boardrooms, that posture was rewarded. Investors mistook intimidation for leadership. Media profiles praised her edge, her refusal to coddle, her willingness to make tough calls. What they called decisiveness was often cruelty dressed in metrics. What they called confidence was a fear of losing control. On the job site, she carried that same logic. People were not people. They were delays, liabilities, line items. Workers existed to clear her path, not share it. Replaceable bodies in vests and helmets, interchangeable and forgettable. When she spoke down, it wasn't a lapse. It was habit. Bias didn't announce itself with slurs or raised fists. It showed up in assumptions. In who she expected to answer back and who she expected to stay quiet. In whose presence felt threatening and whose felt beneath notice. Professionalism became a costume she wore until it inconvenienced her. The insult slipped out easily because it had been rehearsed 1,000 times in her head. A reflex honed by power that had never been challenged. She believed the hierarchy would protect her. That status made her untouchable. That silence around her meant consent. She mistook applause for respect, numbers for morality, and fear for loyalty. Never noticing how quickly rooms emptied behind her, how eyes hardened and how patience thinned, waiting for consequence to finally arrive there. And then, in front of everyone, she said the line that would cost her everything. The comment landed sharper than she intended, or maybe exactly as intended. She tilted her head, looked him up and down, and laughed, a sound meant to signal superiority, not humor. "I don't know who hired you," she said, "but next time, tell your supervisor to keep his guys from wandering where they don't belong." She straightened her blazer and decided silence was disrespect. If he wouldn't react, she would force him to. Her voice sharpened, louder now, performative, designed for witnesses. You don't answer back to executives, she said. You move when you're told. That's how this works. A supervisor flinched. Someone reached instinctively for a radio. She gestured toward the elevator, already narrating consequences. Security can escort you out if you're confused about protocol. We don't have time for attitude. Still, he didn't rise to it. He stood where he was, shoulders relaxed, eyes steady, hands open at his sides. I understand, he said. I'll adjust. That was when the room started to tilt. Not toward her, but away from her. Authority felt thinner, stretched by the contrast. Her face tightened. She had expected compliance to look smaller, not steadier. His calm exposed the performance she was giving. No one breathed. The machinery hummed, distant and irrelevant. The man adjusted his gloves slowly, as if time itself had thinned. When he spoke, his voice was even, respectful, almost gentle. Ma'am, he said, I was assigned to this floor. I'll move if you need the space. That was it. No attitude. No explanation. No plea. Just compliance offered without surrender. The restraint unsettled her. She had expected resistance or shame, something to crush or correct. Instead, she felt exposed, like a punch thrown at someone who never flinched. A few workers exchanged looks. A phone rose higher. Someone whispered, "Damn." She scoffed. "Figures," she replied. "People like you always say that. Always standing where you shouldn't, acting like you own the place." The words echoed. "People like you." The air shifted, heavy and unmistakable. His jaw tightened, but his eyes stayed level. He nodded once, stepped aside again, and said nothing more. That silence spoke louder than anything else could have. It forced everyone listening to sit with what had just been revealed. Not his status, but hers. Not his position, but her assumption. In that moment, the hierarchy cracked. The room felt smaller, charged with the sense that something irreversible had just happened. Cameras kept rolling. Witnesses kept watching. And somewhere beneath the concrete and steel, the balance of power quietly began to move. Everyone sensed it. The insult had crossed an invisible line, and there was no stepping back. Authority, once questioned, starts to leak. Respect, once broken, doesn't return quietly. She felt it too, though she wouldn't admit it yet. The stillness unnerved her more than shouting ever could. And instead of retreating, she leaned forward, ready to prove she still held control. The room waited, knowing escalation was coming, and consequences would soon demand a response from everyone present there. Around them, hard hats turned. People stopped pretending to work. Phones were no longer hidden. This wasn't discipline. It was spectacle. She leaned closer, lowering her voice into something meant to intimidate. "You think you're clever," she said. "I can end your day with one call." He met her gaze, unblinking. "You can," he replied. "Do what you need to do." The simplicity rattled her. Power fed on resistance, and she wasn't getting any. Murmurs spread. A worker shook his head. Another whispered, "This ain't right." She mistook their silence for backing, unaware that something else had already begun. The moment had escaped her control, traveling faster than authority ever could. While she believed she was asserting dominance, the truth was being captured, uploaded, shared. and judged by millions who would never see her corner office. Only her reflection in this moment. She didn't notice the phone's angle just right. The timestamps, the usernames, the quiet certainty forming behind the lenses. She thought power lived in proximity, in volume, in threats said aloud. She never considered how quickly it dissolves once witnesses decide who they're actually watching. Somewhere beyond the scaffolding, beyond the concrete, a story was being written without her permission. And while she believed she was asserting dominance, the internet was already preparing to tell a very different story about power, dignity, and the cost of mistaking silence for weakness. A story she would soon be forced to confront, frame by frame, without control, without edits, and without the protection she thought her title guaranteed. As consequences began moving faster than apologies, faster than spin, faster than authority could ever recover from this. Asterisk, when the clip hit social media, it didn't creep. It exploded. Grainy footage, raw audio, no captions at first, just tone, posture, power. People didn't need context. They recognized it instantly. Comment sections filled in minutes. We've all seen this before. That's not leadership. Why is she talking to him like that? Workers recognized the sight. Parents recognized the exhaustion in his face. Immigrants recognized the calculation in his silence. Black viewers recognized the danger he navigated without flinching. Hashtags climbed. Reaction videos multiplied. Body language experts broke down her stance, her volume, her need to dominate. Labor advocates paused the clip on his stillness, calling it restraint, not fear. The internet did what it does best. It named the imbalance out loud. Meanwhile, the CEO's team scrambled. Statements were drafted, softened, deleted. The narrative was no longer hers to manage. Every replay stripped away polish and left only intent. Every share widened the gap between how she saw herself and how the world now saw her. What shocked people most wasn't the insult. It was his response. The refusal to perform pain. The calm that refused to beg. Viewers projected themselves into that silence and felt something click. Momentum built because this wasn't just about one woman or one job site. It was about power, assuming it would never be questioned. It was about dignity surviving where respect was denied. Employers issued quiet memos. Journalists bookmarked the clip. Community pages shared it with captions that read like warnings. This moment felt familiar and different at once, like history repeating but refusing to stay hidden. The crowd wasn't debating anymore. It was deciding, and then, buried in a comment thread, someone paused the video, zoomed in, and typed 6 words that changed everything. They recognized him, and the comment spread fast. Screenshots multiplying as curiosity turned into shock across every platform before the sun even rose nationwide. Online asterisk. By morning, the rumors had names attached. Property records surfaced. Screenshots of filings, quiet LLCs, signatures that didn't match the story people had been told. The man in the hard hat wasn't listed as an employee anywhere that mattered. He was listed as an owner, not a figurehead, not a charity partner. The majority stakeholder behind the private real estate trust that financed the project from day one. The trust had been structured to stay invisible, to keep capital from becoming spectacle. He believed buildings should speak for themselves, and people should be judged by how they treat others. When they think no one is watching, the receipts were undeniable. Dates, amounts, board minutes. The same floor she'd walked through dismissively existed because his signature had made it possible. He hadn't corrected anyone because he didn't need validation. He had learned that titles invite attention, and attention invites trouble. So he wore boots and kept his head down, investing quietly while raising his kids and paying his crews on time. As the truth spread, the tone online shifted from outrage to awe. Clips were replayed with new context, her words suddenly heavier, his silence suddenly thunderous. Commentators paused the footage and asked a different question now: who really owned the room? Inside the company, panic replaced posture. Emails flew. Lawyers reread clauses. The story they'd tried to spin collapsed under documents that didn't care about spin. Power rearranged itself without asking permission. He didn't announce the reveal. He didn't post a statement or chase the moment. The truth arrived the way it always does, patiently, inevitably, carried by people who needed it to be real. When reporters finally reached him, he said only that respect shouldn't depend on what someone owns. That was when the building changed. Not its walls, but its gravity. Every step echoed differently once people understood whose vision had paid for the ground beneath them. The hierarchy they trusted turned upside down, exposing how little they'd actually known. Executives recalculated in real time, measuring apologies against contracts, weighing humility against exposure. The room that once centered her suddenly leaned elsewhere. Influence migrated quietly, like water finding lower ground. Everyone felt it shift. The reveal didn't humiliate him. It clarified the moment, forcing witnesses to confront how easily they had mistaken costume for substance and the cost of that mistake. And when the CEO saw the filings, saw the name she'd mocked printed where power actually lived, her certainty drained away, replaced by a silence she couldn't command. When she finally addressed it, the room felt smaller than it ever had. Cameras were set, statements prepared. The CEO stood where authority once came easily, but her voice arrived differently now, softer, measured, carefully cautious. The certainty was gone. "There's been a misunderstanding," she began, choosing words the way people choose shields. She spoke about respect, about values, about how the company didn't condone what had happened. An apology followed, polished and precise, the kind designed to survive headlines. It landed flat, then attention shifted. He didn't step forward dramatically. He didn't raise his voice or claim victory. He simply spoke when asked, his tone steady, almost conversational. He confirmed the facts without embellishment. Yes, the trust was his. Yes, he financed the development. No, he hadn't felt the need to announce it. "I was there to check on the work," he said. Same as always. That was it. No speech, no anger, no demand for sympathy. The contrast did the work for him. Where her apology sounded managed, his truth sounded lived in. Where she tried to reclaim control, he demonstrated he'd never lost it. The room understood instantly. Authority doesn't beg to be believed. It doesn't rush to explain. It exists quietly, and when revealed, it needs no defense. Her power depended on perception. His DIDN single quotes T. questions followed, sharper now. About culture, about accountability, about why respect only seemed to appear once wealth was confirmed. She answered carefully, but each response felt smaller than the last. Her confidence had been built on hierarchy, and hierarchy had just failed her publicly. He stood still as it happened, not enjoying the reversal, not feeding it. He had children to pick up, work to finish, life to return to. This moment didn't define him. It defined everyone watching. The silence around him grew heavier, not awkward, but instructive. It clarified something people often miss, that dignity doesn't need permission and power doesn't need volume. The hierarchy had flipped without shouting, without force, without spectacle. And as the cameras kept rolling, one truth settled in. Embarrassment was only the beginning. Because accountability doesn't end when the room goes quiet. It begins when systems are forced to answer for what silence once allowed. Asterisk boardrooms filled quickly after that. Emergency meetings, muted microphones, faces tied with calculation. Lawyers spoke in careful sentences. Public relations teams chased a narrative that had already escaped them. Statements were revised, then revised again, each version softer, emptier than the last. Resignation rumors leaked before decisions were finalized. Investors asked questions they hadn't bothered to ask before. Emails surfaced. Policies were suddenly cited as if they had always mattered. The system moved the only way it ever does when exposed, to protect itself first. What forced the response wasn't outrage alone. It was clarity. There was no ambiguity left to spin. The footage was clean. The documents were public. The contrast was undeniable. Dignity had done what shouting never could. It made denial look ridiculous. Committees were formed. Reviews announced. Training promised. Executives spoke about learning moments and corporate values, trying to sound reflective without admitting fault. But power had already shifted. The building no longer echoed her authority. It echoed consequence. He watched none of it closely. He didn't need to. Accountability wasn't his demand. It was the system's debt. He returned to work, to family dinners, to routines that grounded him long before this moment ever went viral. Justice didn't require spectacle. It required follow-through. By the end of the week, leadership changed. Whether by resignation or removal hardly mattered. What mattered was the message sent quietly through every floor and hallway. Assumptions had costs, and silence had witnesses. The system responded because it had to. Because ignoring dignity is easy until dignity stands still and forces everything else to move around it. Yet the most powerful moment wasn't what happened to her. It was what came next, when attention shifted away from punishment and toward a man who never asked for recognition, but earned it anyway. His calm didn't just diffuse a moment. It rewrote the rules everyone thought were fixed. In a culture trained to mistake volume for strength, he showed that restraint can be revolutionary. He refused the script that demands the marginalized perform pain to be believed. By standing still, he forced the truth to move. Wealth, when it is secure, doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't mock uniforms or measure worth by proximity to power. His money built walls and paid wages, but his character built something rarer, a mirror the system couldn't look away from. The insult failed because it hit someone who didn't need permission to exist. What unsettled people most was how ordinary his response was. No triumph. No revenge. Just facts offered plainly. That simplicity exposed a deeper corruption, the way respect is rationed, the way assumptions substitute for curiosity, the way silence is mistaken for consent. When dignity refuses to beg, the lie has nowhere to hide. For parents watching, it felt like a lesson worth passing down. For workers, a reminder that worth doesn't come from titles. For immigrants and black families, a validation long overdue. Survival skills are not weaknesses. They are wisdom earned under pressure. He didn't win by humiliating anyone. He won by refusing to become what the moment invited. Calm became the language justice understood. And in that quiet clarity, something shifted beyond one building or one career. It reminded a country of an old truth. Power that needs to demean is already afraid. And authority that fears dignity will expose itself. He showed up the next morning the same way he always did. Boots scuffed, lunch packed, phone buzzing with school reminders. No entourage. No announcement. The building hummed differently now, not louder, just more honest. People looked twice before assuming. Voices softened where they once barked. Respect learned to arrive before titles. He didn't chase the moment because moments pass. Character doesn't. He kept working, kept parenting, kept investing in a future that never needed applause. Somewhere between steel beams and quiet choices, the world adjusted its posture. Because power doesn't always sit in corner offices. It waited patiently. Power isn't proven by who you talk down to. It's revealed by who never had to explain who they were.